Settle into the softest part of the evening, where nothing is required of you except a little stillness. Let the room around you become ordinary and kind, with its familiar shadows and its quiet corners. There is no map to follow tonight, no distance to cover, and no bundle to carry. I'm the Yawning historian. For a while, we can travel only as far as a slow story will take us. Imagine an oasis town at the edge of a long, dry country. It is early enough that the day has not yet become bright, and late enough that doors have begun to open. The air holds a little of the night. A narrow channel of water moves through the settlement with a sound so small that it is almost a thought. Beyond the last gardens, beyond the low walls and the shade of planted trees, the ground opens into a pale distance. There is a caravan preparing to leave. We will not give it a precise size, because caravans came in many sizes, on many routes, in many centuries. We will not pretend that every person in it has the same destination. One person may be going only to the next market town. Another may be taking a familiar section of road. A third may be returning from a visit, carrying news that is more important to a family than any object tied to an animal's pack. Their routes overlap for a while, as paths sometimes do, and that is enough to make a small traveling company. The word Silk Road can make the past look wonderfully simple. It can bring to mind a single broad track, beginning somewhere in China and ending somewhere near the Mediterranean, with one endlessly patient line of camels moving from one end to the other. It is a pleasing image. It is also not a very useful one. The people who moved through Eurasia over many centuries did not know a single highway with that later name. The phrase Silk Road was coined in the 19th century, long after the old routes had changed again and again. What we call the Silk Roads were networks. They were land routes and sea routes. They were paths around mountains, tracks between wells, river crossings, market streets, ports, passes, and stretches of open country where the next useful place mattered more than any grand idea of east and west. So the morning begins not on a road that belongs to everyone, but on a route that is useful to these travelers now. It joins other routes farther on. It separates from them later. It has been chosen because it leads from one place with water and people to another place with water and people. That is a modest beginning, and a great many important journeys have begun in modest ways. At the edge of the town, bundles are checked without hurry. A wrapped length of cloth is pressed with a hand to make sure it's not as firm. A container is lifted, then put down again. An animal turns its head toward a familiar voice. There may be horses among the travelers. There may be camels. In the medieval caravan world, both horses and camels were standard ways to move goods across land, though no single animal belonged to every landscape or every century. The story need not choose one as the hero. The useful thing is the patient rhythm of animals, people, and objects moving together. Nothing in this little departure announces a journey across all of Asia. Most merchants did not carry their goods from one distant end of the network to the other. Goods often moved in stages, handed on at markets and towns. A merchant might know one part of the road deeply, the water places, the local rules, the familiar faces at a gate, the season when a particular route was best avoided or best used. Another merchant knew the next part. A load could change hands more than once, gathering local goods and local knowledge as it went. This makes the Silk Roads less like a single ribbon and more like a woven cloth. One thread crosses another. One thread ends at a market and is picked up somewhere else. The pattern can spread across a very wide world without any one person holding all of it at once. For our calm, imagined week, you are not the owner of a great caravan. You are simply someone who has been allowed to travel beside it for the first stage. Perhaps you have a small bundle. Perhaps you have come from a house near the water channel, and the person who knew you best has already returned indoors. You do not have to prove that you belong to a legend. You only have to keep pace with the morning. The town falls behind slowly. First there are walls and gardens. Then there are the last places where shade gathers close to a doorway. Then there is the outer track, pale under the beginning sun. No line marks the point where the town stops and the route begins. The road is made by repetition. Feet have passed this way. Animals have passed this way. Packs have passed this way. In some places, the route will be clear. In others, it will be a choice between directions that are all possible and none entirely perfect. It is tempting to think of old travel as a contest against emptiness. Yet the people who used these networks were not walking blindly into blank space. They moved between known places. There were towns, small settlements, trading posts, watering places, and later, in many regions, caravanserais. There were people whose work depended on the arrival of travelers, just as the travelers depended on the places that received them. A town could offer a market. An oasis could offer water. A road station could offer a pause. A nearby field or canal could be as important as a distant city whose name appeared in a courtly account. The first part of the day is gentle enough. The light is low. The route rises and falls almost without asking for attention. Someone walks beside an animal and keeps a hand near a strap. Someone else looks back once at the buildings of the oasis town, now reduced to a small arrangement of earth-colored shapes. It is not sadness exactly. It is the ordinary knowledge that every departure rearranges the day. What would make such a first week hard for a newcomer is not necessarily drama. It is the accumulation of small adjustments. The day begins earlier than one might choose. The pace belongs partly to animals and partly to the next stopping place. A person cannot expect every path to be shaded, every pause to be long, or every town to have the same customs. Even comfort is practical. A good place to stop is a place with what the next morning will require. The route, in other words, has its own manners. It asks a traveler to notice water before distance, weather before boasting, and familiar local advice before a dream of going farther than anyone else. This is not a failure of courage. It is simply how travel becomes possible. The caravan does not move in a perfectly straight procession. Sometimes the animals spread a little where the ground allows it. Sometimes people draw closer together where the track narrows. There is no need for a grand command. The group has enough small habits to keep it together. A pace is found. A pause is understood. The day begins to make its own quiet shape. As the sun rises, the oasis is no longer visible behind them. Ahead lies a country that cannot be described by one word. The Silk Roads crossed regions of very different climates and landforms. In one documented corridor between Chang'an and Central Asia, the routes touched deserts, mountains, steppes, rivers, lakes, salt flats, and oases. Conditions could range from extreme dryness to more humid country. A traveler's experience depended on which section they were in, at what season, and with what companions. For now, this imagined section is dry but not hostile. The ground is open. The travelers have left a place of managed water, gardens, and dwellings. They are moving toward another useful settlement. The distance between the two is not a puzzle for us to solve with a modern map. It is enough to understand that the next place is part of the plan. This is what makes the road feel less romantic and more real. It is built from the next place. There is time to notice the packs, not their exact contents, because historical cargo varied widely, but their general presence. The Silk Roads carried silk, certainly, but also many other kinds of things. Textiles, spices, foodstuffs, animal skins, tools, wood, metal objects, religious items, works of art, and precious stones all belong to the broader exchange. Not every bundle contained something rare. Not every person was a merchant. The important detail is that objects traveled with people, and people traveled with ideas, habits, languages, and memories. One small parcel may be meant for a buyer at the next town. Another may have been added only recently, purchased because it was useful there and expected to be useful somewhere farther along. The caravan is not a sealed container carrying a single culture in one direction. It is more like a moving market of possibilities. That is why the great old routes did not only move merchandise. People met at stopping places. They heard unfamiliar speech. They saw different styles of cloth, different ways of arranging a shop, different foods prepared close to a market. Over long periods, this steady movement helped knowledge, crafts, beliefs, and artistic styles travel as well. None of this needs to happen dramatically in one morning. It can happen in the smallest way, when a person notices a new object on a stall and remembers it later. The sun is higher now. The caravan makes a small pause, not because an adventure has interrupted it, but because pauses are part of travel. An animal is allowed to stand. A strap is checked. A traveler shifts the weight of a bundle. The quiet is not empty. It is made of ordinary care. If you had arrived from a comfortable modern room, you might already feel the difference. You might notice that there is no private timetable. The group moves when moving makes sense. You might want to know how much farther, but the answer would be shaped by terrain, water, and the next place, not by a number printed on a sign. You might miss the thought that every plan can be revised at a moment's notice. In this world, a good traveler learns to let the route be particular. That particularity is worth keeping. The Silk Roads are sometimes made so large that no human scale remains. Maps give them broad arrows. Books give them bold names. The arrows are useful, and the names can be useful too, but the lived route was made of smaller things. A gate opening at dawn, a path around a field, an animal refusing to hurry, a town where a merchant chose to sell rather than continue, a well that made a detour sensible, a familiar inn, a canal, a patch of shade, a companion who knew what came next. The caravan starts again. Its movement is steady. There is no need to imagine a sudden storm or a terrible threat. The day is already full. Each step carries the group a little farther from the oasis and a little nearer to the next pause. The route is not asking them to conquer it. It is asking them to understand it. Perhaps that is the first quiet lesson of a week on the Silk Roads. The famous road was less a line on a map than a sequence of familiar stops, each handing the journey to the next. A person who expects a single heroic march might find the routine demanding. A person who accepts the routine can begin to see its gentler logic. Near midday, the light becomes flatter. The ground has the same pale color for a long while, and the movement of the caravan becomes almost like breathing. Ahead, there is no gleaming endpoint, only the knowledge that somewhere beyond the visible distance there will be another place where people have arranged their lives around arrival and departure. We can leave the travelers in that calm interval. The oasis behind them is now part of the morning they have completed. The road ahead is not one road, and it never needed to be. It is a chain of places, maintained by use, memory, water, and exchange. For tonight, it is enough to walk beside it slowly, without asking it to become a legend all at once. The day continues at its patient pace. The bundles remain tied. The animals continue. The travelers look ahead, then down at the ground, then ahead again. And beneath the wide, ordinary sky, the route carries them not toward an abstract edge of the world, but toward the next known place. There is a comfort in understanding that a route can be made from many small agreements. One town agrees to receive travelers because travelers bring work and exchange. Another place keeps water moving through a channel because water makes gardens, animals, and households possible. A merchant chooses a familiar stop because familiarity has its own value. A person who leads an animal knows when to loosen a strap. None of these actions looks grand from far above, but together they make movement across a wide region possible. In later centuries, people looking back could trace large patterns across the map. They could see that goods, techniques, stories, and beliefs had traveled enormous distances. But the traveler at ground level did not wake each morning inside an enormous pattern. They woke beside a pack, or beside an animal, or near a wall in an oasis town. They asked where the next water was likely to be. They noticed the light. They listened for the ordinary sounds of a group preparing to move. It is possible to be part of a vast history without feeling vast at all. The caravan on this first morning is doing something almost domestic. It is carrying, checking, waiting, walking, and pausing. Its connection to distant places exists, but it is not loud. It is contained in cloth, in a small object intended for exchange, in the habits of people who have traveled their own section before. As the morning lengthens, a traveler near the back adjusts a covering over a bundle. The gesture is so small that no one else needs to notice it. Another traveler walks a few steps in silence. The animals continue with a steadiness that asks nothing from the sky. There are no banners in this scene, no ruler's proclamation, no single grand border between one world and another. There is only the work of keeping a party of travelers, animals, and goods in reasonable order. For someone new to the route, this order might be tiring precisely because it is so constant. There is always something to attend to. There is the ground underfoot. There is the place of the next rest. There is the changing position of the sun. There is the care required by objects that cannot simply be left behind. The routine does not offer the bright excitement of a short excursion. It offers the slower discipline of continuing. Yet routine can become restful when it is accepted. A person need not decide everything again at every step. The next town is already part of the day. The companion who knows this section has already seen the bend in the track. The animals recognize the rhythm of stopping and starting. Even the open land becomes less empty when one understands that it lies between known places. This is why it helps to imagine the old networks as routes of connection rather than routes of isolation. The dry spaces were real, and the mountains were real, and travel could be demanding. But the points between them mattered just as much. Oases, towns, markets, canals, roadsides, and later inns were not decorative details around the journey. They were the journey's practical body. So, as the caravan moves into the quieter middle of its first day, let the grand phrase Silk Roads fade gently into a more human picture. There is no single road. There is a morning leaving one oasis. There is a group moving toward another stopping place. There is a parcel that may change hands, a person who knows a path, and a day arranged around what can be reached with care. The story can rest there for a moment. Behind the travelers, water still runs through the town they left. Ahead, another settlement waits somewhere beyond sight. Between the two, the caravan makes the road by using it, one unhurried stage at a time. By the time the first morning has become afternoon, the caravan has learned the shape of its own little world. It is not a large world. It contains the ground beneath the animals, the bundles that need to remain secure, the companions within calling distance, and the next useful place. The wide landscape is present all around them, but practical attention has a way of making a vast country feel close. The route has no interest in proving anyone brave. It does not reward a traveler for declaring that distance is unimportant. It asks for something quieter. It asks that people pay attention before they grow tired, that they notice water before they need it, and that they treat a pause as part of the journey rather than as an interruption to it. For a person used to maps, it is easy to give distance all the power. A line on paper looks like an instruction. It begins at one named place and ends at another. In the landscape itself, however, a route is shaped by more than the space between 2 points. It bends toward water. It considers the ground under animal feet. It takes account of shade, season, passes, rivers, and settlements. It becomes sensible because people have found ways to live along it. The old Silk Roads crossed regions of very different kinds. In the documented Chang'an-Tianshan corridor, routes touched great rivers, alpine lakes, salt flats, deserts, snow-covered mountains, grasslands, and oases. The climate could range from extremely dry to semi-humid. These words describe a broad corridor across long periods, not one unchanging day. Still, they remind us that no traveler could rely on a single image of the road. Our imagined caravan is traveling through a dry section connected to oasis towns. It does not set out to cross a blank desert by force of will. It moves from one place with managed water toward another place where water and people make a stop possible. In this kind of travel, the important question is not how impressive the day's mileage might sound in a story told later. The important question is whether the next stage has been judged well. The judgment belongs to experience. Someone in the group may have traveled this section before. Someone may know which route is commonly used in a season like this. Someone may have heard that a particular stopping place is busy, or that another path makes more sense when the ground is dry. We do not need to invent their names or their exact advice. The quiet fact is enough. Routes were choices, and choices were local. The animals make this plain. A horse or camel is not a piece of scenery placed at the edge of a romantic painting. It is part of the day's calculation. Its pace, its footing, its need for rest, and the care of its load all help shape how a caravan moves. In the medieval caravan world, both horses and camels were standard means of moving goods over land. But there was no universal animal, no universal pace, and no single rule that could be carried unchanged from one climate to another. So the travelers do not hurry simply because the sky is large. They move steadily. They pause when a pause is useful. A strap is checked before it becomes a problem. A bundle is shifted before it rubs in the same place for too long. An animal is given the chance to stand quietly. Such actions can seem almost too ordinary for history, but they are history when they happen day after day. There is a small patch of shade beside a low rise in the ground. It is not enough to turn noon into evening, but it offers a change in the light. The caravan stops. No trumpets announce the stop. People lower bundles. Animals are allowed a moment of stillness. The travelers do not need a precise food list in order for the scene to feel real. It is enough to know that journeys required planning, and that food and water belong to the practical life of a route. At this pause, you can feel the difference between a traveler's time and a clock's time. The sun moves. The group rests. There is no schedule printed on a wall. There is only a shared understanding that the day must be arranged so that the next necessary place can be reached in good order. This is one reason that the phrase Silk Roads should remain plural. A route through a mountain pass is not the same as a route along a river valley. A route that follows a chain of oasis towns is not the same as a route over open steppe. A merchant in one century may know a set of stops that another merchant in another century would not recognize. The network changed with political conditions, local economies, available water, and the shifting habits of trade. At Dunhuang, on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, the routes moving west passed north and south of the desert. The town lay at the junction where those routes came together. This does not mean that every traveler stood at the same decision point, or that every route was equally easy. It means that the landscape itself encouraged more than one path. Around a difficult region, people found ways to connect places rather than insisting on one straight passage through the middle. The idea is restful when you let it be simple. The route bent around water. A town, a canal, and a place to water animals could matter more than a straight line west. A person who understands this is not less adventurous. They are more likely to arrive at the next place with what they need. For a newcomer, this may be one of the first quiet frustrations. You cannot measure success only by how far the horizon seems to have moved. You have to accept that a modest stage, carefully managed, may be the right stage. You have to accept that someone else's knowledge of a well, a canal, or a familiar stopping place may be more valuable than your desire to press onward. The caravan starts again when the shade has done its small work. The ground ahead has changed color, not dramatically, but enough to show that the day is moving. The animals settle into their pace. A loose object gives a soft sound against another object. A traveler walks beside it and adjusts the tie. This is not a scene of hardship in the theatrical sense. It is a scene of continued attention. In the broader Silk Roads network, water did more than allow a thirsty traveler to continue. Water helped make settlements possible. In the Chang'an-Tianshan corridor, extensive water management systems supported towns, trade settlements, forts, caravanserais, and agriculture. Canals, ditches, reservoirs, wells, and other arrangements varied across the region. The point is not to imagine one grand system serving the whole road. The point is that human work with water helped create the places where travel and exchange could happen. An oasis, then, was not merely a green surprise against sand. It was a working place. It could support gardens, households, markets, and animals. Its water had to be guided, shared, protected, and used. Its position could make it a stopping point on a route. A traveler approaching such a place at the end of a day might feel relief, but the oasis was not there solely for the traveler. It was home to people with their own work, their own fields, their own obligations, and their own reasons for caring about the channel that ran through the town. This thought slows the story down in a useful way. The caravan is not passing through scenery. It is moving through other people's inhabited landscapes. The next stop is not simply a reward for surviving a dry interval. It is a community and a system of care already in motion before the travelers arrive. The afternoon light begins to soften. There is still a long way to look, but the route has a little more texture now. A small rise gives a view of lower ground. A distant line of trees might suggest water, though no traveler would be wise to build a plan on a glimpse alone. The group continues with the steadiness of people who have learned not to make the horizon do more work than it can. In well-serviced regions of the medieval network, caravanserais were generally placed about a day's journey apart, with an average spacing of 30 to 40 kilometers. That is a useful historical detail if it is held gently. It describes an average in regions with service, not a universal promise. Mountains, weather, local conditions, and different centuries could change the experience. In our story, it simply means that the idea of a next stop was built into some parts of the travel world. People did not always have to imagine every night from nothing. There is reassurance in that. The road could be demanding, but it was also inhabited by expectation. A traveler knew that other travelers had come before. A place might be arranged for arrival. A gate, a market, an inn, a water channel, or a familiar road station could be part of an accumulated pattern. The route was difficult enough to require attention, but it was not a pure wilderness without human memory. As the group moves on, one of the travelers points without needing to speak loudly. The gesture is not a promise. It is only an indication that the land ahead is beginning to change. Perhaps there is a lowering in the ground. Perhaps the path has become more traveled. Perhaps the group recognizes a feature that belongs to the approach to the next settlement. We do not need to identify it exactly. The important feeling is that the day has been read correctly so far. This is the slow work of travel. The people beside you do not need to be heroes. The animal beside you does not need to perform a miracle. The route does not need to become a test designed for a modern audience. It is enough that people keep track of the practical things. They protect their goods. They care for their animals. They decide when to rest. They travel toward water and shelter with the patience that the landscape requires. Perhaps that is why the title's dramatic thought begins to fade as we walk. A person might find a first week difficult, not because every hour is filled with spectacle, but because the journey asks for a new kind of attention. It asks a traveler to surrender the fantasy of a straight line. It asks them to notice that comfort is prepared long before it is felt. It asks them to understand that a successful day is often no more glamorous than reaching the next water and shelter before the light is gone. The sun lowers slowly. The caravan does not rush to make the day dramatic at the end. The route is still there, still made of ground, weather, and accumulated local knowledge. A few more steps bring the group nearer to the next useful place. The sound of movement becomes familiar enough that it no longer needs to be heard separately. For a moment, imagine yourself walking among them. You have stopped looking for a single road across the world. You have stopped asking for one exact number that explains the day. You notice instead the sensible things. The care of a strap, the stillness in a patch of shade, the presence of water in the plan, the slow promise of a settlement beyond the visible land. The caravan carries on, unhurried. The day has not been conquered. It has been managed. And in the calm fading light, that is more than enough. The managed day has a sequence that becomes clearer the longer one watches. First there is the place left behind. Then there is the first easy stretch, while minds are still fresh and the light is gentle. Later there is a pause, chosen not because the group has failed to continue, but because continuing well includes stopping. After that comes the longer middle portion, when the sun has made its claim on the land and attention must be renewed. At last there is the approach to the next place, when care turns toward arrival. This sequence does not need to be identical every day. No source allows us to promise that it was. Still, it gives a quiet order to our imagined caravan. The people in it are not counting each step in competition with one another. They are learning how to place effort where it helps. A person walks beside an animal. Another watches the packs. Someone familiar with the local section notices the direction of the track. The work is divided by habit, not by ceremony. It is possible that a newcomer would first notice the absence of small conveniences. There is no easy way to retreat from the weather. There is no fixed sign telling you exactly when the next stop begins. There is no promise that the ground will be equally easy for each animal or each person. But the route is not without kindness. Its kindness is practical. It appears in the known water place, in the shade that can be used, in the person who has gone this way before, in the settlement that has grown where water can sustain it. The caravan moves through the late afternoon with this practical kindness around it. The land does not speak. It does not offer an explanation. It simply has features that people have learned to read. A change in vegetation may matter. The line of a channel may matter. The position of a town beside a useful route may matter. People who lived and traveled in these places did not need a romantic map to know that water was part of the road's grammar. Across the historic network, routes were dynamic. Merchants had choices, and the choices responded to local situations. They could pause to rest and replenish supplies. They could sell cargo at points along the way rather than insist on carrying it farther. Goods could be exchanged with local populations and joined by local products. This made a journey less like a sealed expedition and more like a gradual conversation between places. For the listener walking with this caravan, that idea offers relief. You are not required to imagine a single impossible task. You are allowed to imagine a series of smaller tasks. Reach the shade. Check the pack. Follow the route toward water. Allow the experienced traveler to decide when a stop is sensible. Let the day be made from stages. The first week would ask for this adjustment again and again. Morning would begin before a person was fully ready. The ground would keep the same quiet demand beneath the feet. The afternoon would make the next stopping place feel important. Yet repetition could slowly make the unfamiliar familiar. A traveler might begin to recognize the rhythm of animals settling into motion. They might begin to understand why no one rushes the pause. They might learn to see a strip of cultivated green not as decoration, but as evidence that people have made a life beside water. There is no need to say that all travelers felt the same relief or used the same route. The network was too broad, and the centuries too varied for that. We can say only that the infrastructures of water and stopping places mattered. In some places, they made long-distance exchange more workable. In every small scene, they made the next stage imaginable. Now the light near the western edge of the sky has softened. The caravan comes to a gentle downward slope. The travelers do not celebrate the end of the day. They simply recognize it. A place of rest is nearer. The animals are guided on. The dry country, which seemed so broad in the early afternoon, has acquired a direction again. Think of the road not as a challenge laid down by history, but as a set of agreements with the landscape. Go when the conditions allow. Pause where a pause helps. Do not confuse a straight line with a wise line. Choose water before distance. Choose shelter before pride. Let the day close when the next known place has been reached. The caravan continues into the evening, and the sound of its movement becomes soft enough to carry us toward the next story. Ahead, a wall and a doorway wait in the fading light. For now, the road has done what it needed to do. It has carried the travelers from one workable place toward another. The last light rests on the track behind them. Nothing has been wasted by the pauses, the care, or the slower choices. They have all become part of the distance already traveled. With water and shelter close ahead, the day can finally loosen its hold. The next useful place does not appear all at once. First, there are signs that the route is becoming less open. The ground is marked more often by the passing of feet and animals. A wall, low against the evening light, takes shape at a distance. Then there are other details, modest and practical. A doorway, a section of roofline, the suggestion of people who have been busy with their own day long before this caravan came near. For travelers in many parts of the medieval Silk Roads, a caravanserai could offer a night of shelter between stages. The word brings to mind a large roadside inn, but it should not make us imagine one identical building repeated across all of Asia. Caravanserais varied by place and period. Their location depended on geography, water, and concerns about the road. Their buildings used different materials. Their arrangements responded to different climates and local habits. The most honest way to enter one in a story is slowly. Our imagined stop stands near a settlement on a Central Asian oasis route. It is not named because we are not recreating a particular building. It is a narrative room built from a real kind of place. It has a wall that separates its interior space from the open road. It has an entrance that gives the arriving caravan a sense that the day is changing shape. It has enough order to make arrival possible. The caravan does not arrive as a conquering procession. It comes in tired from the ordinary work of the day. The animals have carried or accompanied the loads. The travelers have watched the route, the ground, and the light. Their reward is not luxury. It is the chance to stop moving for a while. At a caravanserai, travelers could eat, rest, and prepare for the next stage. In the Persian tradition, roadside inns supplied shelter, food, and water for caravans, pilgrims, and other travelers. These are simple words, but each one carries a great deal. Shelter means that the sky no longer has to be the ceiling for the night. Food means that travel can be paused long enough for a body to recover from the day. Water means that people and animals can be considered before the morning begins again. The group enters without a need for elaborate drama. A person near the front speaks to someone who works at the place. We do not hear invented dialogue. The words would vary with language, custom, and circumstance. We only see that arrival requires recognition. Animals need to be brought where they can stand. Bundles need to be kept where they can be watched. A traveler needs to learn how this particular place works. This is one of the reasons a first week on the old routes might feel demanding for a newcomer. Every stopping place could have its own rhythm. The route was not a modern chain of identical rooms, identical signs, and identical rules. A person had to look, wait, and learn. A companion familiar with the region could make a great difference, not through a dramatic rescue, but through knowing how to enter, where to pause, and when to listen. Inside the walls, the day's distance becomes small. The broad landscape has been reduced to a courtyard, a threshold, a place for animals, a place for bundles, a source of water, and the beginnings of a meal. The road outside still exists, but for the moment it has been set aside. Tomorrow will require movement. Tonight requires care. Some caravanserais became meeting places precisely because they gathered people who were moving between places. Merchants could exchange goods, trade in local markets, and meet other travelers. Languages, skills, ideas, and customs could meet in these pauses. It is easy to make this sound crowded and brilliant, as though every night became an international festival. The quieter truth is more useful. When people stop in the same practical place, they have an opportunity to notice one another. A new kind of textile, a tool, a small object, a method of packing, a word heard twice in the same evening. Exchange can begin with attention. Our caravan's bundles are brought close. The objects within them do not need to be listed like treasures. The wider silk roads carried many kinds of goods. Silk was one of them. So were other textiles, spices, cereals, fruits and vegetables, animal skins, tools, wood and metal objects, religious items, art, and precious stones. A particular traveler might carry only one modest kind of thing. A particular load might be intended for the next market rather than the next continent. This is another calm correction to the old picture. A caravanserai night did not belong only to wealthy merchants with rare cargo. Roadside inns and other stopping places received many kinds of travelers. Pilgrims, merchants, workers, messengers, local travelers, and people with different purposes could share the fact of having arrived. The details of access and comfort varied, and we should not claim that every person experienced the same welcome. Still, the basic act of stopping created a temporary world. The animals are tended first or alongside everything else, because they are part of the journey's living structure. They have been present through the dry afternoon, through the track that curved toward this settlement, through every adjustment of a strap. A place that can receive a caravan must make room for them as well as for the people. In a well-made story, this is not a sentimental moment. It is practical respect. The traveler's next day depends in part on the condition of their animals, just as it depends on the condition of their own bodies and goods. Water is used with the attention it deserves. We do not measure it. We do not claim an exact ration or a universal ritual. We simply understand that a place with water changes the meaning of an evening. It makes cleaning, drinking, tending, and preparation possible. Across the routes of Central Asia, water systems supported settlements, agriculture, and the infrastructures that serve travel. At this stop, the traveler does not need to see the whole system. The traveler only needs to hear, perhaps, the small movement of water nearby, and to know that it has been planned for. The sky becomes darker above the courtyard. The last color leaves the wall. One by one, the objects of the day's journey are made still. A rope is laid down. A cloth is folded. A bundle is placed where it can be found in the morning. A person sits with their back against a wall and allows their shoulders to drop. The world has not become perfectly safe or perfectly private. We should not invent that. But it has become contained. Containment is a gift after a day on the road. Outside, the land had no roof. Inside, there is an edge to the space. There is an entrance. There are other people awake nearby. There is the low murmur of ordinary tasks finishing. For someone who has traveled only a few days, this may be one of the most reassuring things in the world. Not comfort in the modern sense, not a promise that nothing can change, but the simple knowledge of where the night will be spent. The caravanserai should not be made too elegant. Some historic examples are large and impressive. Others were adapted to their regions, their materials, their climate, and their place along a road. Our imagined stop gives no precise architecture beyond what the story needs. A courtyard, walls, doorways, space for arrivals, a place where the work of travel can be paused. This restraint keeps the scene honest, and it leaves room for the listener's own gentle picture. Near a wall, a merchant examines something small. Perhaps it is a piece of cloth, perhaps a tool, perhaps a wrapped item that will change hands at a market. We do not decide. The act of looking is enough. On the Silk Roads, goods often moved by stages. A bundle could be sold in one town, added to another caravan, and carried onward by a person who knew a different section of the network. This did not make the object less connected to distant places. It made the connection more human. The road was built out of many partial journeys. Elsewhere in the courtyard, another traveler is simply resting. That is equally part of the history. Not every person at a stopping place is arranging an important exchange. A long route produces long intervals of ordinary waiting. Someone waits for an animal to settle. Someone waits for a companion. Someone waits for the meal to be ready. Someone waits because the next stage cannot begin until morning. Waiting is one of the slowest skills in travel. It is also one of the most necessary. The route teaches it without announcing the lesson. A person who wishes to hurry may find that the road has many ways of asking for patience. There are gates and markets. There are changing conditions. There are animals and bundles. There are local practices that a stranger must respect before moving on. Even a night indoors has its own unhurried order. The sound inside the caravanserai grows softer as people settle. We do not need a fire described in dramatic detail or laughter echoed from every wall. The sleep story can keep to smaller sounds. A cup set down. A footstep crossing packed ground. A piece of cloth shaken once and folded. The faint breathing of an animal. Water moving somewhere beyond the wall. These are enough to make an evening. In the great history of the Silk Roads, cities and towns became hubs because travelers came to rest animals and begin the work of trade. Places along the routes could gather people whose lives would not otherwise meet. Over centuries, the movement of people helped spread skills, arts, ideas, and beliefs, as well as goods. But in the present moment, none of the travelers needs to speak about centuries. The only history they know is the evening in front of them. The next stage is tomorrow. The current task is to rest. Perhaps you find a place near a wall. Your imagined bundle is close enough to touch. The dry day has ended. Your feet no longer have to follow the track. There is nothing to decide until morning. If unfamiliar voices carry through the courtyard, they become part of the background, not something you need to understand. The road has brought many people to this one enclosed space, and for a few hours their separate journeys overlap. This overlap is one of the quiet beauties of a caravanserai. It is not a permanent town for every traveler. It is a temporary arrangement. People arrive with different destinations and depart in different directions. Yet while the night lasts, their lives share a roofline, a water source, a wall, and the common fact of being between one place and another. The word between can sound uncertain, but here it becomes peaceful. You are between the oasis behind you and the next settlement ahead. You are between the morning's walking and tomorrow's walking. You are between the open sky and the smaller, more sheltered night. You do not need to see the entire route. You only need to let this pause be complete. Some travelers may use the evening to learn something about a market farther on. Some may exchange a small item. Some may say little. We do not need to make every encounter meaningful in the way a modern story might demand. The shared place is meaningful enough. It gives movement a rhythm. It allows travelers to eat, rest, prepare, and begin again. Outside the walls, the route remains dark and patient. It is not gone. It is simply waiting. The old networks did not function because people traveled without stopping. They functioned because stopping places existed. Towns, oases, water systems, markets, forts, road stations, and caravanserais gave shape to the distances between them. Travel depended on the work of people who lived along the routes as much as on the people who passed through. The night deepens. The courtyard holds its modest arrangement of animals, bundles, walls, and tired travelers. A person who has been new to the route for only a few days may begin to understand why the next door, the next water, and the next place to rest matters so much. The grand map has disappeared into darkness. In its place is a small, ordinary world where the day's distance has become manageable. At the inn, the day becomes smaller. Animals, bundles, water, a meal, and tomorrow's next stage are enough to fill the mind. This is not the end of the journey. It is not even the end of the road. It is simply a room with a door to close, and for tonight, that is a very gentle kind of arrival. Let the walls remain around the travelers. Let the sound soften. Let the route outside become only a memory of pale ground beneath the afternoon sun. By morning, the caravan will move again, carrying its separate purposes forward. But now, in this medieval roadside inn of our imagination, the road is allowed to sleep too. Before sleep comes fully, there is still the small work of making tomorrow possible. A traveler checks that a bundle will be easy to find in the dark light of dawn. Another thinks over the next section without turning the thought into worry. An animal settles. A piece of cloth is drawn closer against the evening air. These gestures are quiet preparations, and they are more useful than grand plans. The stopping place gives each preparation a boundary. Outside, a traveler might feel that every decision must be made against a wide horizon. Inside, the decisions become smaller. Where should the bundle rest? Which companion will rise first? What must be done before the gate opens again? The answers do not need to be precise for us. The feeling of order is enough. It is worth remembering that caravanserais flourished across Central Asia, especially from the 10th century onward, as trade routes developed and became more lucrative. That history belongs in the background of the scene. It tells us that the roadside inn was not an accidental shelter found by chance. In many regions, it was part of a growing network of places designed to accommodate movement. It allowed travelers to pause without having to invent a night from nothing. Even so, no one can be treated as a guaranteed refuge for every road, person, or century. Some places were better supplied than others. Some were shaped by harsh climates, some by local materials, some by the water available nearby. Conditions of security and geography mattered in choosing their locations. The honest story leaves room for this variation. Our small courtyard is not every caravanserai. It is one calm version of a type of place that made travel possible. That variation makes the night more human. A traveler does not arrive at a perfect copy of the last stop. They arrive at another particular place, with its own walls, workers, sounds, and habits. Perhaps it feels familiar because the purpose is familiar. Food, water, shelter, and rest. Perhaps it feels strange because the people and language are not the same as yesterday. Both feelings can exist together without needing to be explained. Near the entrance, a late arrival is received with the same practical attention that met the caravan earlier. There is no need to follow this new traveler's story. Their presence is enough to show how the place keeps working after sunset. A road station is not silent simply because one caravan has stopped. It holds the steady traffic of people who are each between one place and another. The imagined listener can remain still. You do not have to rise for the newcomer. You do not have to learn where they came from or what they carry. You can listen to the small changes in the courtyard and let them pass. The road's vastness has become a sound behind a wall. In the morning, some goods may be exchanged in a local market. Some travelers may continue. Others may remain. The larger network will keep moving by stages, as it has done for centuries. But those facts can wait until daylight. The night asks for no more than rest. There is a particular peace in being part of a temporary community without needing to perform for it. Around you are people with their own reasons for being on the route. They do not need to become characters in your story. They are simply present, and their presence makes the courtyard less empty. The low sounds of their evening become a gentle proof that this is a place known to travelers. Beyond the walls, water continues its unnoticed work in the settlement. Somewhere, a channel carries what has been guided into it. Somewhere, people who will not travel tomorrow prepare for their own morning. The caravan has been received into a landscape of local care. That is what makes the rest possible. So let the final thought of this chapter be modest. The caravan has not conquered a desert, reached a glittering capital, or solved the whole map. It has reached a stopping place. It has found a wall, a doorway, water, and time enough to prepare for another day. In the long history of the Silk Roads, this modest achievement happened again and again, quietly sustaining journeys that were always made of many smaller journeys. The sounds become fewer. The bundles do not need to move. The animals are still. The traveler's thoughts can become as quiet as the courtyard. And behind the closed door, the road waits patiently for morning. The morning at the edge of the town did not begin with a dramatic line across the ground. It began with a gate, a wall the color of old dust, a shaded place beside it, and a small gathering of people who all had reasons to wait. The caravan had come in from the open country on the previous day. Now its bundles rested under covers. Its animals stood quietly where they could be watched, and the road ahead was close enough to see. Yet no one hurried onto it. For a newcomer, this waiting might have felt like the least romantic part of a journey. The old stories that survive in books and museums often leave their travelers already moving. A painted camel is shown with a bright saddle. A merchant appears with a precious textile. A city gate opens behind a procession. The slow minutes before the gate, the small conversations, the checking and rechecking of a knot, are easier to lose from view. But a road made of many local stages was also made of many local pauses. The famous name Silk Roads can make the whole journey sound like a single broad avenue. In the medieval caravan world, it was more often a network of route sections, towns, markets, river valleys, passes, and oases. The next stage depended on the season, the ground, the people who knew it, and the arrangements already made. A traveler could carry a bundle a certain distance and then hand it into another chain of care. A merchant could visit towns that were familiar to him without crossing all of Asia. A person new to the network might find that even a first week asked for patience before it asked for bravery. In the little area before the gate, patience had a sound. There was the brushing of cloth against cloth. There was a hoof shifting on packed earth. There was a low murmur from a person who knew the local rules better than the strangers did. There was the faint scrape of a wooden container being moved out of the sun. A day of travel could not be measured only by the distance between one horizon and another. It was also measured by the time required to become legible to the people at each stopping place. The caravan in this story is imagined, and its members remain unnamed. That is a gentler way to travel beside them. One person has experience of this route section. Another has been hired for a particular stretch. Another carries goods that may change hands in the next town. None of them needs to be made into a hero. They have ordinary skills. Noticing a loose strap, remembering where a spring lies beyond a ridge, recognizing the face of someone who can explain a local custom, knowing when silence is more useful than a speech. Beyond the wall, the town continued with its own morning work. The Silk Roads did not have one authority that made every stopping place alike. Different states and communities maintained different kinds of infrastructure, and each route section belonged to particular landscapes and settlements. The caravan had reached a local pause rather than a universal threshold. It is enough, here, to notice that the road was never empty of people who knew more about one small section than a newcomer did. The bundles stayed closed. Their contents need not be named too precisely. Along the broad networks later called the Silk Roads, textiles were important, but they were only part of a larger exchange. Things of high value could travel long distances through successive merchants. Other goods could enter and leave the route locally. Tools, metal objects, hides, foodstuffs, wood, precious stones, religious objects, and crafted things all belong to wider patterns of exchange in different places. At this gate, the bundles are simply bundles. They have been wrapped carefully against dust and against the attention of a careless hand. A familiar companion is valuable because he shortens no road by magic. He makes the next small act less uncertain. He may know which side of the yard stays cool, which track has been used recently, and when a pause will make the next stretch easier. Towns along the networks brought many languages and skills into contact, but each meeting had its own limits. Understanding was often built slowly, through repeated encounters and the local knowledge carried by people who moved between familiar places. This is one reason the imagined newcomer might not last a week with much comfort. It would not be because every morning held danger. It would be because every ordinary morning required attention. A person who did not know the route might not know when to rest animals, where to obtain water, how long a local negotiation could take, or which companion had the right experience for the next stretch. The work of travel was distributed among many hands. It was practical, social, and almost always more gradual than an adventure tale allows. The sun rose a little higher above the wall. Dust on the upper edge of the gate took on a pale gold color. One of the animals lowered its head. Someone adjusted a cover over a load, not because there was a great emergency, but because the cover had shifted a finger's width in the night. In a long journey, these small corrections were part of the rhythm. A strap was not merely a strap. It connected a load to an animal to the day's pace, and the day's pace to the chance of reaching water or shelter while light remained. In well-serviced regions, sources suggest that caravanserais were often spaced about a day's journey apart, on average perhaps 30 to 40 kilometers. The phrase needs to be held lightly. It was not a promise made by every landscape. It was not a measure of what every caravan could accomplish. Desert edges, mountain ground, weather, animals, water, and local conditions could change the day completely. Still, the thought of a next stage gave travel a modest shape. The task was not to conquer a continent. It was to reach the next place that could receive people, animals, bundles, and tired feet. The gate did not have to be imagined as forbidding. It was a piece of the town's daily arrangement, just as a canal, a market yard, or a stable might be. In parts of the Central Asian corridors, towns and route sections were supported by water systems, forts, way stations, caravanserais, and other works maintained by different communities. Such infrastructure did not erase hardship, and it did not make every journey easy. It did mean that travel was connected to maintenance. Someone cleared a channel. Someone repaired a wall. Someone knew the condition of a road after rain or wind. Someone had prepared a place where an animal could drink. The caravan waited because maintenance has its human equivalent. A journey needed its small agreements kept in order. The imagined leader of the group did not stand apart in a grand cloak. He bent to look at a rope. He asked an experienced companion to look at it too. The two people did not need a long exchange. The rope either lay well or did not. A pack either sat evenly or leaned. A water container either closed firmly or needed another strip of cloth around its mouth. The quiet competence of such actions might have been more common on the road than speeches about distant kingdoms. At last, one bundle was set near the others. The scene does not need a particular transaction to make its point. Goods were not only carried. They could be stored, exchanged, repaired, or divided into smaller portions as they moved through towns and among successive merchants. Trade was a sequence of local acts. A length of cloth could change hands more than once. A small piece of metal could pass from one market to another. A story heard beside one well could arrive at the next town in another voice. The slower kind of historical attention is useful here. It refuses the picture of a lone merchant racing from one end of the world to the other with a single cargo. Sources suggest that much long-distance movement happened through stages. A bundle could be carried by a succession of merchants and through a succession of towns. This did not make the exchange less remarkable. It made it more human. It depended on many people who were never required to see the whole route. Each person needed only to understand the next gate, the next customer, the next animal, the next water source, the next stretch of weather. The newcomer listened. There was no need to give him a name. He watched the people around the town edge make room for one another and carry on with their separate tasks. He noticed that no one seemed impatient with the fact that the morning was being spent this way. The people who belonged to the route did not necessarily love waiting. They simply knew that waiting was part of moving. Until the group was ready to leave, there was shade to use, an animal to check, and a cup of water to sip slowly. Some historical accounts describe trade towns as places where visitors, goods, languages, and skills met. That does not require us to fill the scene with noise. A meeting can be quiet. A few people can stand under an awning while containers are moved across a courtyard. A person can listen to unfamiliar speech without understanding all of it. A traveler can notice wood smoke, leather, or damp earth near a water channel. The road passed through inhabited places. It was not a ribbon laid across an empty map. The town edge was a gentle change from one familiar arrangement to another. Its exact form is not important for this imagined morning. Even a traveler with experience needed to pay attention. The next community could have a different rhythm. The next section of land might favor different animals. The next shelter might lie farther than expected. No universal instruction book could replace people who knew the local conditions. When the morning pause at the town edge was done, no trumpet sounded. A cover was tied down. A person walked ahead a few paces. Another looked once more toward the wall. The caravan moved in the way most useful to its animals and its loads. There was no reason to go quickly. A fast beginning could become a tired afternoon. The next stage would ask for the same modest care that this one had asked for. Water, shade, attention to ropes, attention to feet, and attention to the people whose work made a route possible. Outside the gate, the town did not vanish at once. A line of cultivated green might have remained near the water. Low roofs stayed visible behind the wall. A track widened where previous feet and hooves had passed. The change was gradual. That is how a road often begins. It begins not at a heroic boundary, but at the point where the last familiar sound becomes faint and the next ordinary task appears. The travelers walked for a while without needing to say much. The one who had helped at the gate fell into step beside the group. His knowledge did not sit in a book. It sat in the order of his movements. He knew which way the track bent. He knew that there was no need to speak loudly in the morning cool. He knew that the animals would find their rhythm after the first slow minutes. He knew that a town behind them and a shelter ahead were both parts of the same long fabric of travel. The newcomer felt the first dust settle on his sandals and the first warmth reach his sleeves. A week was a small unit of time on a historical map. It was also long enough for the body to notice unfamiliar work. A shoulder began to remember the weight of a water container. Eyes learned to look for shade. A stomach learned that meals came when the route allowed them, not when a home kitchen did. None of this needs to become suffering. It is simply the texture of a different routine. The road ahead did not promise a single destination. It offered another local segment, another settlement, another chance to stop and replenish supplies. The very phrase Silk Roads becomes gentler when thought of this way. Not one road, but many decisions. Not one merchant, but many hands. Not one continuous triumph, but a sequence of careful departures and arrivals. By midday, the town wall was only a shape behind a haze of pale air. The caravan did not look back often. There was no need. The work of the morning had been completed in its quiet way. A pause, a few familiar movements, a few adjustments, and then the road. The world did not reveal itself all at once. It became known one manageable piece at a time. For now, the companions kept the same even pace. The ropes did not creak loudly. The animals breathed and stepped. The wind moved over the ground without carrying an urgent message. Ahead, the route curved toward the next place where a person might find a wall, a trough, a little shade, and a door that could be closed at night. There was no hurry at all. The town behind them was becoming part of the morning light. The road in front of them was becoming part of the same light. And the caravan, with all its small human arrangements, went on slowly enough for the day to remain quiet. Each small departure carried its own modest, patient order. Later, when a pale strip of shade appeared beside a low ridge, the group used it without ceremony. They stopped for the brief kind of rest that did not feel like an arrival. A load was checked again. A person loosened the cloth at his neck. The animals stood with their heads lowered. Nothing was being bought or sold at that moment. Nothing important seemed to happen. Yet the pause belonged to the same network as the town. It gave the next part of the day a chance to remain orderly. The intermediary who had walked with them did not tell stories of hidden treasures. He pointed out a track where the surface held firm. He indicated a turn that led toward the next inhabited place. His directions were plain enough to be forgotten by someone who had not needed them. For those who did need them, they were a kind of wealth. A road is not only ground. It is the accumulated memory of where water has been found, where shelter has stood, and where a person should ask before moving on. The newcomer began to understand that knowledge of the route could be shared without being grand. A local guide might know one valley. A merchant might know two familiar towns. A host might know a sheltered corner of a courtyard. A person who cared for animals might know the value of an unhurried afternoon. None of them needed command of the entire network. Together, their partial knowledge made the next stage possible. In later centuries, maps would often make large distances seem clean and continuous. Lines would cross deserts and mountain ranges with an ease that the feet of a traveler could never possess. The medieval road was not a line under a pen. It was a series of moments such as this one, a shaded pause, a remembered turn, a water container passed from hand to hand, a quiet decision to go no faster than the day allowed. There were also limits to what familiarity could do. A person could know a route well and still wait for weather, water, or another party. A shelter could be near and still require the day to be arranged around it. The route was made by cooperation with circumstances, not mastery over them. That thought made the imagined newcomer less embarrassed by his uncertainty. Even the experienced people around him did not command the road. They attended to it. As the rest ended, the companions rose one by one. The movement was unhurried. Cloth was shaken free of dust. A knot was tested with a thumb. A small cup was put away. The animals were encouraged back into their steady motion. No one announced a new beginning. The road simply resumed. Behind them, the town edge pause of the morning was already becoming one more ordinary memory. Ahead, the ground unfolded in muted colors. The caravan did not carry a whole continent in its bundles. It carried the next stage, and that was enough. The wind softened. The steps settled into an even pattern. Each person kept close enough to the others to share the same quiet. In the distance, where the road bent toward water and a town yet unseen, the day waited without asking anything more than patience. By the time the caravan made camp beyond the town, the animals had become the clearest measure of the day. They had not turned the distance into a simple thing. They had carried, waited, stepped, lowered their heads for water, and accepted the patient work of being looked after. In the soft light before night, it was easy to see why the image of a camel became so strongly attached to long journeys across dry country. It was also easy to see why that image never told the whole story. In the medieval caravan world, horses and camels were important means of moving goods over land. They belonged to different landscapes and different parts of a network. A route near cultivated land, a mountain path, an open steppe, and an oasis track did not require the same choices. A caravan did not always look like a single line of camels moving through endless sand. It could include other animals, people on foot, local helpers, and loads that changed as trade moved from one stage to another. The Imagine group had reached a quiet place near low ground where a little water was available. The scene is not meant to stand for every stop across Asia. It is one plausible evening on a medieval Central Asian oasis route. The animals were led into a loose circle. The loads came down slowly. A rope that had held a bundle all day was released with care, because a careless release could scatter dust into cloth or knock a container against a stone. The task was ordinary, almost sleepy. First one strap, then another. First one cover folded, then another. The newcomer had thought that the animals would solve the hardest part of the journey. This had been the kind of thought that comes from seeing only the outline of a road. A camel could be useful, resilient, and well-suited to many dry landscapes. It could not decide which route was best. It could not recognize a familiar host. It could not mend a broken fastening, remember a market arrangement, or explain a local rule at a gate. It could not turn a cold night into a warm one. It could not tell a traveler when pride had made the day's pace too ambitious. The animals needed care before the people could settle. Their water and feed could not be treated as an afterthought. Their feet and their general condition had to be noticed. The exact practice changed with place, season, species, and the resources at hand, so there is no need to prescribe a universal routine. In this quiet camp, the people did what they had learned to do. They looked. They touched a strap. They waited while an animal drank. They made sure a load had not rubbed in the wrong place. They gave the evening to maintenance. This was one of the hidden lessons of the Silk Roads. Travel was supported by things that needed supporting in turn. A route depended on places with water. Those places depended on channels, springs, wells, rain, storage, cultivation, and the labor of local communities. A caravan depended on animals. The animals depended on rest, care, and people who could notice what was changing. A merchant depended on goods. The goods depended on packing, storage, trust, and the next person willing to receive them. The great network was never only a line of movement. It was a great deal of repeated attention. The camp grew quieter as the work continued. The sun went down behind a low ridge. A blue shadow spread across the ground. In a small fire, fuel caught slowly. No one needed to invent a rich meal for the scene. Meals differed across the routes and through time, and detailed menus belonged to particular sources. It is enough to imagine a modest pause, something warm if it could be made, something plain if it could not, and water handled with care. The day had asked for enough effort already. The newcomer watched the person who knew the animals best. That person did not perform. He moved around the resting shapes with the unshowy confidence of someone whose work was necessary. He was not a figure from a heroic painting. He was a worker with a close knowledge of breathing, ropes, ground, and mood. He noticed when an animal wanted a little more space. He noticed when a load had settled unevenly. He knew that the morning's departure would be easier if the evening's small problems were met before they became large. The famous picture of the Silk Roads often gives every animal a bell and every traveler a bright costume. Such pictures can be lovely, but the actual experience of movement must also have contained long stretches of plain work. Dust gathered on cloth. Leather dried. A knot became stiff. A hand became tired from repeating the same motion. An animal stopped and needed to be encouraged. The value of the caravan was not that it removed all difficulty. Its value was that people and animals, with suitable knowledge and equipment, made many stages possible. In well-serviced regions, caravanserais could be spaced about a day's journey apart on average, though no traveler should hear that as a universal rule. The next and might be closer or farther. A route might bend toward an oasis rather than taking the shortest line. Mountain ground or changing weather could make any simple estimate useless. The group in this story did not count the day with precision. They counted it by what they could see and care for. They had reached a place to stop. The animals had water. The bundles had come down. For one evening, that was success enough. The night air carried the smell of earth cooling after sun. In the distance, a faint line of trees marked the water that had made the settlement possible. Oases were not merely pretty interruptions in desert country. They were logistical places, supported by water and connected to food production, markets, resting animals, and human routines. A town, a canal, a patch of cultivation, and a place to shelter could matter more to a traveler than a straight course west. The route bent around what could sustain it. The animals lay down one by one. Their movement was slow, controlled, and familiar to the people tending them. The sounds of the camp became smaller. A container touched the ground. A cover was pulled over a bundle. Someone stepped beyond the firelight to look at the darkness and then came back. The darkness itself was not an enemy. It was simply the portion of the day in which work changed shape. The newcomer felt his own tiredness arrive more clearly after the loads were down. During the day, attention had kept his body moving. In the evening, the shoulders began to speak in a quiet way. The soles of the feet felt the ground they had crossed. Dust had settled at the edge of a sleeve. Sleep, when it came, would be different from sleep in a familiar room. It would have to arrive among small sounds, shared space, and the knowledge that the next morning would begin with the same careful sequence. This was why a first week might be demanding for someone unused to the route. Not because the world was made only of danger, and not because every camp was a trial. It was demanding because nothing happened entirely by itself. Water was obtained. Loads were checked. Animals were watched. Directions were remembered. A stop was made useful by the work done before night. The newcomer had not expected that so much of travel could be quiet labor. One of the experienced companions unfolded a cloth and shook out the dust in a slow arc. Another sat near the fire and worked a stiff section of leather between his hands. The person who had helped with the animals took a small drink of water and then looked once more toward them. It was not a restless glance. It was the last part of a routine. A good routine creates room for rest because it reduces the number of worries that must be carried into sleep. Across the larger Silk Roads network, goods and ideas moved between many societies over centuries. That broad fact can sound enormous. Here it became modest. A package rested under a cover. An animal breathed in the dark. A person who had come from another town sat without speaking. The network did not need to be seen in full to be real. It existed in the next market, the next water system, the next road section, and in the people who had learned how to join these pieces without assuming they were all the same. The newcomer began to loosen his own outer cloth. He did not complain. He had learned enough in a few days to see that complaints did not tighten a rope or find a spring. Still, he understood the difference between admiring a caravan from a painted wall and being responsible for the hour after sunset. The painted wall showed the movement. The evening showed the maintenance that made movement possible. A quiet wind passed through the camp. The small fire gave off a low sound. Its glow did not reach far, but it reached far enough to make the nearest faces and objects gentle. No faces need be described too closely. The story does not depend on them. It depends on the rhythm of hands, bundles, water, animals, and sleep. Some animals shifted in the dark. The person on watch, if there was one, had no need to be made into a dramatic sentinel. A camp could have reasons for ordinary attentiveness without becoming a tale of constant fear. The workers simply did not abandon the practical world when the sun went down. A rope was kept where it could be found. A water container was put where it would not be kicked over. The path out of the camp remained known. The next day's load would be ready to lift. The local terrain held its own quiet instruction. The line of trees indicated water. The open ground made it easier to see where animals were resting. A low rise gave some shelter from wind. None of these features were grand enough for an imperial map. All of them mattered. The route was shaped by such details, and the people who traveled it learned to attend to them as naturally as they attended to the fading of light. The newcomer lay down at last, not far from the others. He heard the breathing of the animals more than he heard speech. The sound was even and unhurried. It reminded him that the caravan had not arrived at this stopping place by speed. It had arrived by keeping together, by pausing when necessary, and by accepting that the day belonged partly to the needs of creatures other than himself. There is a softness in that thought. The route did not belong to the loudest person in the group. It belonged, for the moment, to the person who noticed a frayed strap, the person who knew a water source, the person who could calm an animal, the person who had made an arrangement in the last town, and the person who now let the fire sink lower without fuss. The sky deepened from blue to navy. A few stars appeared above the ridge. The bundles sat in their covered shapes. The animals lay still. In the morning, the loads would go up again, perhaps in a slightly different order, perhaps after a small repair. The road would ask for the next stage and no more. For the rest of this evening, no one needed to cross a whole desert. No one needed to become a legend. There was water nearby, a modest fire, animals at rest, and a shared understanding that tomorrow would be handled when tomorrow arrived. The newcomer let the sounds become part of the dark. The soft movement of a tether, the last crackle of fuel, the wind passing lightly over packed earth, the slow breathing of the animals that had carried so much and still required care. There was no hurry at all. The camp did not ask to be conquered. It asked only to be kept in order until morning. And as the warmth of the fire became a small amber point beneath the wide night, even the road seemed willing to rest. Before sleep settled fully, there was one more small round of work. It was the kind of work that leaves little trace in a grand history, though it can decide whether the next day begins calmly. A cover was drawn a little farther over a bundle. A cup was rinsed and placed upside down. A worn section of cord was set aside so it would not be forgotten. Someone walked the short distance to the animals and then returned without needing to report anything. The camp was becoming ready for itself. The newcomer watched these actions with the attention of someone learning a new household. In his own home, the objects of evening had their places because everyone already knew them. Here, each place had to be made again before dark. Water needed a safe corner. Food needed to be kept from dust. A wrap needed to be close enough for the cold hours. The animals needed room and calm. The little circle of firelight needed to contain only what would be useful before dawn. It was possible to feel lonely on such a road without being alone. The surrounding landscape was broad. The camp was small. The people beside the newcomer had their own habits and memories. Yet the shared tasks made a modest companionship. One person held a light while another checked a fastening. One person passed a container while another folded cloth. No grand friendship had to be declared. The route created its own practical form of trust, renewed whenever everyone did their portion of the evening work. In a town or caravanserai, the same care might take a different shape. A roadside inn could offer an opportunity to rest, prepare for the next stage, meet other travelers, and use the nearby market. The buildings, provisions, water, security, and arrangements differed by region and period. It would be wrong to give every traveler the same room, meal, price, or comfort, but the underlying need remained familiar. A person and an animal both required a pause in which the day could be put away piece by piece. The thought made the road seem less like a thin path through wilderness and more like a chain of places where maintenance continued. Someone in a town had kept a water system working. Someone had opened a courtyard. Someone had made a stable usable or swept a floor. In another place, perhaps there would only be a simple stopping ground and the skills of the caravan itself. Either way, the next departure began long before the morning sun. It began with the evening decision to keep things orderly. The animals had their own unhurried authority over this schedule. A merchant might think about the value of a bundle, but a tired animal would still require rest. A person might wish to press farther toward the next market, but the ground and the creatures carrying the load would set limits. That was not a failure of ambition. It was simply how land travel worked. The road rewarded the ability to notice limits before those limits became troublesome. As night grew deeper, even the newcomer stopped comparing the journey to the simple picture he had carried in his mind. There was no single magnificent caravan moving forever beneath a single sky. There were stages. There were places with water and places without it. There were people who knew one section well and others who knew another. There were horses and camels suited to particular needs. There were bundles that could travel farther than their first owner. There was, above all, the repeated act of stopping. He listened to the low breathing beyond the fire. The sound was almost enough to count time by. It rose and fell without interest in distant fame or in the name later given to the roads. The animals did not know they had become symbols. They knew the ground under them, the pressure of a strap, the taste of water, the relief of standing still. The fire sank lower. A small red seam remained in the fuel. The people who were still awake spoke more softly, then not at all. The ridge became a dark, steady shape. The line of trees near the water could no longer be seen, but it remained there, making tomorrow possible. The newcomer let his shoulders loosen. He had learned one quiet thing from the animals. Carrying a day did not mean refusing to rest. It meant accepting the pause when it arrived and leaving enough strength for the next ordinary stage. Soon the camp was only a few covered bundles, a few resting shapes, and a little warmth under the wide navy sky. The road had gone dark beyond the firelight. It could wait. Nothing needed to be solved before morning. The newcomer understood that this patience was not the opposite of travel. It was one of the things that made travel possible. By leaving the camp quiet and the animals cared for, the group was already preparing its next small beginning. The road did not demand a grand answer. It asked for another careful morning. The camp began to wake before the light had fully changed. The fire from the evening before was no longer a bright point. It was only a little ash and a suggestion of warmth close to the ground. The ridge beyond the resting animals was still dark. Above it, the sky held that soft gray-blue color which belongs neither to night nor to day. Nothing had yet asked the caravan to hurry. The people who had slept near the bundles stirred in the ordinary way of travelers. A wrap was folded. A container was lifted and set down with care. The animals were noticed before the loads were put back on them. This was not a ceremonial beginning. It was simply the work that allowed a group to leave one stopping place without carrying its disorder into the next one. For the newcomer, morning on the route had become less strange than it had been at the start of the week. The first day had seemed full of unfamiliar rules. Now some of the rules had become visible as habits. A strap was checked before it had reason to fail. A water container was treated as something worth placing securely. An animal was given time to stand and settle. The order of these actions was not grand, but it held the morning together. This is one quiet way to understand a journey across the Silk Roads. It did not begin each day with a dramatic leap into the unknown. Much of it began with the same small decisions made again. The people who traveled did not have to know the whole network. They had to know enough about the next part of it. They needed to reach the next useful place, and then to leave that place ready for another stage. When the first light reached the low ground, the caravan moved toward an oasis settlement. We do not need to give the town a name or imagine that it was identical to every town on the old routes. Across the wider network, settlements differed in language, size, custom, water, market life, political ties, and the landscapes around them. Yet a town near a dependable source of water could offer what a route required. It could give travelers a place to pause, animals a chance to rest, and merchants an opportunity to exchange what they carried. The approach was not a straight line toward a distant wall. The track bent toward the features that made settlement possible. There were planted trees close to the water, low places where channels carried it, and ground that showed the long attention of people who had learned how to live there. In the Chang'an-Tianshan corridor, one documented part of the larger network, water management systems supported towns, forts, caravanserais, cultivation, and travel. Such systems were not a single invention of a single authority. They were maintained in different places by different communities and states over long stretches of time. That history was not written on the morning air. To the newcomer, it appeared as a simple fact. Water was moving where water could be used. The settlement was there because people had done the repeated work of making a settlement possible. A channel did not look as impressive as a map of continents, but it could matter more to a tired traveler arriving with animals and bundles. The caravan slowed as it came nearer. A person who knew this section of the route moved ahead a little, not as a hero or a master of every road, but as someone familiar with this particular arrival. On the old networks, local knowledge could be as useful as a valuable object. Rules, arrangements, and customs were not the same everywhere. A traveler who imagined that one habit would work at every gate would soon discover the limits of that idea. There is no need to turn the town entrance into a scene of tension. The quiet fact is enough. Arrivals required time. People waited while their presence, goods, or purpose were understood. Trusted intermediaries and familiar local contacts could make the work smoother. The newcomer had learned that patience was part of the road. It was part of arrival too. While the group waited, the town became clearer in small pieces. A courtyard opened somewhere beyond the first buildings. A narrow street held a little shade. Water made a soft sound where it passed through stone or earth. There were signs of household life and work, though the story need not invent every shop, meal, or profession. A settlement along a route could bring together residents, visitors, traders, skills, languages, and ideas. It did so not because all of them became one thing, but because they met for a time in the same place. The newcomer noticed that the other travelers did not treat arrival as the end of labor. The animals still needed care. The bundles still needed to be placed where they would not be in the way. A person who hoped to trade still needed to meet the right people and learn what was useful here. A person who planned to continue farther still needed to think about the next stage. The road had not disappeared at the gate. It had simply become a market street, a courtyard, a water channel, and a series of local tasks. This is why arriving was also a kind of leaving. Each arrival held the beginning of another separation. Some people in the group might stay only a short while. Others might leave behind part of a load and take on something new. A merchant could sell an object without following it farther. Another person could carry it onward through a region the first merchant did not know. The wider Silk Roads worked through such stages. Goods often passed from merchant to merchant and from town to town, rather than traveling with one person from one imagined edge of the world to the other. The familiar name of the Silk Roads can make every bundle seem as if it contains silk. Silk was important, but it was one part of a much broader exchange. Textiles of different kinds, spices, cereals, fruits and vegetables, hides, tools, wood, metal objects, religious items, works of art, and precious stones all move through portions of the network at different times and in different ways. Not every traveler carried the same thing, and not every town wanted the same thing. The road was large because it connected many local needs, not because every load was identical. In the calm of the courtyard, the newcomer began to see how a bundle could have a life of its own. It might have been wrapped in one town, carried to another, examined by someone who knew its value, and exchanged for something that belonged more naturally to the next place. The people who handled it did not need to know its entire future. They needed to make one careful transfer. In this way, the object traveled farther than any single day's walk. No one in the story needs to speak in a dramatic voice about distant lands. The larger world was present quietly. It was present in an unfamiliar texture on a piece of cloth, in a tool made with a different technique, in a visitor who had arrived by another section of the route, or in an idea remembered after a conversation. Over centuries, the networks of Eurasia helped customs, craftsmanship, artistic forms, and religious traditions move as well as goods. But in an ordinary town, those long movements could begin with nothing louder than a person looking closely at something they had not seen before. The traveler who had joined the caravan for the week carried no great responsibility in this town. That was a relief. He could sit near a wall while the people with experience did what experience required. He could watch an animal lower its head toward water. He could watch a covered bundle become one item among many ordinary things waiting for attention. The famous road, which had seemed so large in the imagination, had become small enough to fit inside a morning of waiting. There was a useful modesty in that. The town did not need to prove that it stood at the center of the world. It only needed to serve the people who had come to it. A place with water, working spaces, local knowledge, and room for exchange could become important to a route without ever being grand. A town could be one link among many, and still be the most important place in the world to someone who had reached it tired at dawn. In well-serviced regions of the medieval caravan world, caravanserais were often about a day's journey apart on average. That description belongs to a general pattern, not to every path, pass, or settlement. It is not a promise that every traveler found the same shelter at the end of every day. The physical form, provisions, security, and arrangements of roadside inns varied by region and period. Still, the idea of a pause was fundamental. A caravanserai could offer an opportunity to eat, rest, prepare, meet others, and make use of a nearby market. The group in this story had already known one quiet night of that kind, and one quieter camp where its own skills mattered more. Now, in the oasis town, the newcomer could see both forms of travel side by side. There were built spaces shaped for visitors, and there were the habits people carried within themselves. A covered courtyard could be useful. So could a person who knew how to keep a rope from chafing a load. A water channel could be useful. So could a companion who understood when to stop asking the road for more. The day did not need to be filled with a complete account of trade. Most exchanges, like most maintenance, are patient and partly hidden. An object is shown. A condition is considered. A piece of cloth is unfolded and folded again. Someone points out a familiar feature. Someone else remembers what is wanted in the next town. Such actions can take time. They are not less historical because they are quiet. They are how a network becomes real in the hands of people who must decide what to carry, what to release, and what to leave for another day. The newcomer rested in the shade for a while. His first week on the route had taught him that rest was not the empty space between meaningful events. It was one of the meaningful events. A traveler who rested an animal, checked a bundle, drank where water was available, or waited for a local arrangement was doing the work that made further travel possible. Nothing was gained by pretending that a route of many stages could be completed in one breath. Outside the town, the land continued in several directions. One path might lead toward another oasis. Another might connect to a smaller settlement. A third might be more useful at another season or for another kind of load. The network did not unfold like a single corridor with one door at the end. It branched, joined, and changed with circumstance. The old phrase Silk Roads is useful when it helps us remember connection. It becomes less useful when it asks us to forget the many particular roads beneath it. Somewhere beyond this town, another traveler would take up a new part of a journey. Perhaps a good would be repacked. Perhaps a local merchant would understand the next market better than the person who had carried it this far. Perhaps an animal would rest while a different animal took a later section of road. These are not spectacular events. They are the modest movements through which a wide exchange was built. The newcomer understood now why the first week might be demanding for someone who had imagined only romance. The work was not one long moment of danger. It was more persistent than that. It was a daily practice of accepting dependence. Dependence on water and the people who managed it. Dependence on animals and the people who cared for them. Dependence on hosts, local rules, companions, paths, repairs, pauses, and the next place that could receive a traveler. The road asked a person to notice how much of a journey belonged to others. That realization did not make the journey smaller. It made it gentler. It allowed the newcomer to stop measuring the route against a fantasy of solitary endurance. The meaningful achievement was not to dominate a continent. It was to arrive at one town in reasonable order, to put down the load without damage, to let the animals rest, and to understand that someone else's knowledge would carry the next stage. As afternoon began to soften, the person who had guided the group toward this town returned from the business of arrival. There was no need to give that person a name or invent an exact arrangement. The quiet result was enough. Some of the caravan's work had been completed. Some of it would continue. A few bundles were still there. Others were no longer part of the group. The shapes of departure and arrival had changed without fanfare. The newcomer walked a short distance beside the water. He did not go far. The town was not his to wander through as if it were a museum. It was a living place, organized around its own people and routines. He only stood where he could see the channel pass between walls and planted ground. The water moved steadily. It had been drawn, directed, shared, repaired, and depended upon. Its sound was smaller than the history attached to the road, but it was closer to the truth of how a route remained usable. He thought back to the room at the beginning of the journey. It had been a familiar room, with quiet corners and an evening that asked nothing of him except stillness. The oasis town had also offered corners and stillness, though of another kind. In the first room, there had been no map to follow and no bundle to carry. On the route, there had been maps only in the broadest sense and bundles everywhere. Yet both places depended on the same gentle truth. Rest is easier when the necessary things have been put in order. By now, the original oasis lay behind the caravan as another stage of the story. Its channel still ran there. Its gardens still held their shade. Its doors had long since opened and closed again. The people who had stayed behind were continuing their own days. The road had not carried them all away. It had only linked their town for a while to the next one. This was the patient scale of the Silk Roads. A route could connect places separated by great distances, but no one had to hold all those distances in mind at once. A town maintained water. A merchant knew a section of road. A caravan reached a courtyard. A bundle changed hands. An animal rested. Someone learned a local custom. Someone continued the next day. Over many centuries, these modest acts helped make a network whose influence reached far beyond any single person. The evening gathered around the new town. Again, the light on the walls became softer. Again, bundles took on the quiet shapes of things waiting until morning. Again, animals settled after the work of the day. The newcomer had seen enough to stop expecting the road to reveal itself as one vast spectacle. It was more like a long series of rooms, yards, gates, channels, tracks, and stopping places. Each had its own small order. Each asked for attention before it could offer rest. In the distance, a traveler prepared to leave in another direction. This was not an ending to be mourned. It was the ordinary continuation of a route. The object carried by that traveler might continue through several more hands. The traveler might know only the next section well. That was sufficient. The network did not require everyone to be everywhere. It required many people to be reliable in the place they understood. The newcomer had begun the week beside a small caravan, thinking perhaps that a famous road would feel like a single grand line. He would leave this story with another picture. He would remember a chain of familiar stops. He would remember water before distance, a quiet inn, the care of animals, and a town where arrival became another form of preparation. He would remember that the broadest history was made from repeated, ordinary work. Now the story can move back toward the room where it began. Let its familiar shadows return. Let the ordinary corners become kind again. There is no road to cross tonight. There is no pack to tighten, no animal to settle, no gate at which to wait. The old routes can rest where they belong, in their many places and many centuries, while the quiet of your own room becomes enough. The imagined caravan will leave when morning comes. It will take only the next stage. It will not try to become a legend before breakfast. Its animals will be checked. Its bundles will be lifted. Its travelers will rely on water, local knowledge, and the patient work of one day after another. Somewhere farther on, another town will receive them. Somewhere else, another person will carry part of the journey forward. For now, the walls of the oasis town have gone soft in the evening. The channel makes its low, continuous sound. The courtyard is quiet. The goods that changed hands have found their temporary places. The animals breathe without hurry. The roads beyond the town have become dark lines under a wide sky, and they can remain dark until dawn. You do not need to follow them any farther. The journey has done enough. It has shown that a road can be many roads, that an arrival can begin another leaving, and that even a vast exchange depends on small acts of care. Let those acts grow distant now. Let the water, the low fire, the quiet courtyard, and the settled animals become only a gentle background for sleep. Thank you for spending the night in history with me. I'm the Yawning Historian. Good night.